going to be a new one opening up for African Americans as well on the mall, and that's under construction right now. The American Indian one is interesting both because people had a hard time figuring out what it should be, and there was a lot of discussion about it, a lot of debate, which is actually still going on today. Because when you talk about American Indians, you're talking about a couple hundred nations, they're called. Just as in America itself, we have over 400 languages spoken in the country. So how do you bring one identity together under all that? But coming back to the American Indian Museum, one of the things that I thought was interesting, and my wife was actually studying cultural heritage at the time in Washington, D.C., and she went to the storage facility of this museum. And this was a living storage facility that was off in the outskirts of Washington, D.C., where you could go into this place and you could tell they put a lot of care even in the preservation of them for a very respectful way, not just in preserving the item, but making sure that the spirituality of it was preserved as well. And the nations could actually come in and still use those objects for their religious ceremonies, for their cultural ceremonies. So again, one specific example of where we've tried to do a better job in preserving cultural heritage and looking out for at least one group in America has been the American Indians. And again, some people argue, with our tumultuous past with that particular group, maybe we owed them or something, but in the end, I like to think that we just embrace them as part of our larger identity.
Thank you very much. Now I have one question for the both of you, and then we go to the first discussion, or we will open the floor for the audience for the first time. So my question to both of you here is, should the Serbian community be afraid of disappearance of Serbian cultural heritage after the departure of the international community from Kosovo?
Yes. Here it's on. Well, the short answer is no. The more elaborate answer is that the international community will never leave Kosovo, or put it the other way around. If the international community cannot be in Kosovo, Kosovo will be in the international community. What I mean by that is we all agree, at least all the people in the international community that I know, everybody agrees that we believe in Kosovo's European perspective. And that means that we want Kosovo to become a member of the European Union. Being a member of the European Union implies that Kosovo will never be left alone. It will have the European Union around it, on top of it. There is constant supervision. There is no such thing as national sovereignty once you belong in a large family of nations, of countries like the European Union. I, being Greek, know very well what that means, and I do not resent it, to tell you the truth. And in fact, it is a peculiarity of us Balkan peoples, because we always complain about our politicians, and we say that they are not doing a good job, etc. And when the European Union is trying to intervene and correct the mistakes of our national politicians, we tend to condemn the European Union for doing that, and we say, well, it's taking away our sovereignty. I do not care who the Minister of Finance, for instance, would be in Greece, whether he's Greek, Italian, or for that matter, Turkish. Provided that he or she is doing a good job. So, in other words, what I'm saying is that the European Union supervision in Kosovo will never end. It is here now that Kosovo is trying to become a member, and the closer Kosovo gets to the European Union, the more intense the supervision will be. And once it is a member, the supervision will be part of everyday life in Kosovo.
From my perspective, similar, no. I don't think the Serbian the Serb community is in long-term threat or will disappear, nor do I think the international community is bound to leave at least any time in the foreseeable future. America, speak on behalf of the United States, we've committed a lot to this country. We've put our credibility behind this country. We've invested millions and billions of dollars and in Kosovo and around the world for the cause of Kosovo. And it's not something that we're going to be able to walk away from, nor do we want to walk away from. More specifically, though, I don't think that there's a long-term threat, the same kind of long-term threat that existed a long time ago, not a long time ago, the same that existed years ago, because the institutions are, for the first time, being established that will ensure that once the international presence draws down, which I believe it should draw down eventually, that Kosovo institutions will be in a better place to pick up the responsibilities that have been handed. And we've already been, and I say that because we've already been seeing a change. We've already been seeing a transition happen. So the institutions that exist now would have been inconceivable 10 years ago. Again, because I'm most comfortable speaking on behalf of what we at the American Embassy are seeing, we look at the qualification of Kosovo for a Millennium Challenge Corporation Compact. Now, Millennium Challenge Corporation is a huge development program that the United States government funds. It's only provided to countries who reach a certain level of rule of law and good governance in the country. Kosovo clearly has a long way to go in this area, and that's something that we're going to continue working on through different development assistance and political assistance. But they have reached at least the minimum threshold where this Millennium Challenge Corporation can come in, and they're going to focus on economic growth in particular. The idea is they're not going to go into countries where they'll invest millions, hundreds of millions of dollars if they don't believe the government isn't just going to steal all that money. So the systems have to be in place to do that. And I know there's a lot of crime, but the structures, the police, the prosecution, judiciary, these are developing, and these are much better condition now than they have been. And we're going to continue to see them grow, and I think that's going to be to the benefit of the Serb community. The last example I'll give for how this is working is in the court cases that have been facing the Serbian Orthodox Church lately. Now, these have been ongoing, and frankly, some of them, like the Dečani Monastery, the Visoki Dečani Monastery case, has taken far too long, but the Constitutional Court did work, the judicial system did work in the end, rule of law did prevail. There have been protests, but so far they've been peaceful. Kosovo police have coordinated extremely well with KFOR in Western Kosovo to make sure that nothing has developed from this. Violence has not happened. And the courts frankly worked in this case. They realized that that it had taken too long, and the constitutional right to a fair trial had been neglected.
Okay, thank you. We'll come back to. Do you want to add?
Yes, if I may, it is a question further down in your questionnaire, but since you mentioned the court case of the Dečani issue, the other court case too has been dealt with in a court of law in Kosovo in a way that is favorable to the church. I'm referring to the Christ the Savior Church, and it has been taken up by court on 26 November. A court of law in Pristina, the basic court of Pristina, dismissed the suit brought against the church by the University of Pristina.
We will discuss these let's say more difficult questions later. Before we go on to these questions, I will ask the audience here if they have any comments or, of course, questions for you. Okay. They would have known by now. Okay, so Mr. Moskopoulos, after a March pogrom in Kosovo, what did Kosovo authorities do in order to restore the destroyed cultural and religious monuments?
Yes, right after the riots and all the destruction, a commission was put together to deal with the reconstruction of certain monuments that had been damaged or destroyed. That commission was called Reconstruction Implementation Commission. It was headed by the Council of Europe, and it had 5 members, 2 Serbian, 2 Kosovo Albanian members. The 2 Serbian members were the Serbian Orthodox Church and the Ministry of Culture from Belgrade, and on the Kosovo side, the Ministry of Culture and the Institute for the Protection of Monuments. Their target was the reconstruction of 34 monuments, and they started in 2005, and they were supposed to finish the works by the end of 2010. At the end of 2010, they had completed something like 70% of the works, and the whole project stopped there, because then the next year the Ministry of Culture wanted to abandon the format they had had up until then, because that format was based on an MOU signed between the Serbian Orthodox Church and ANMIC on behalf of the temporary institutions of self-governance, whatever the exact title was. And the government then, in 2011, said that since we have declared independence, we want to have a different foundation of this project. And they suggested a format, and in fact, at the time, I worked with the then Minister of Culture, Mendy Krasniqi, to work out a format which was good, which would give the church full discretion in the management of its property. The church would decide on whatever they wanted to do, the way it had been done before. And on the other side, it would be, one interlocutor would be the church, and the other interlocutor would be the Ministry of Culture of Kosovo. And each side, and in particular the church, would have the right to have as many advisors, and whatever advisors they saw fit, including ANMIC if they wanted, including the Ministry of Culture of the government of Serbia. The only restriction would be that they would all be in the delegation, members of the delegation of the Serbian Orthodox Church. They would not be sitting behind a nameplate that would say Ministry of Culture, Republic of Serbia. And also, another very important aspect of this new beginning was that the sides agreed to set up a 3-member expert group that visited all the 34 sites, and they came up with a report that stated all the work that had been done and all the work that was still to be done. The 3-member expert group was headed by a Spanish expert, Montañez Antonio, I think, Montañez anyway, and then one architect on the part of the Serbian Orthodox Church, appointed by the Serbian Orthodox Church, and one architect from the Ministry of Culture of Kosovo. The report was prepared in the spring of 2012, and both sides agreed that that was accurate, and that was the basis on which the unfinished works would be carried out. Final agreement to go ahead was not reached then. It's another story which is maybe interesting, but not for now. And so nothing has happened since then. Now, the current government has agreed at long last to go ahead, and also the church has agreed at long last to go ahead. And we hope that they will start soon, although nothing has happened, and we are already in June, and by the time they agree to do works, the construction season will be over. But anyway, this is how we are.
Some people, who paid for the work?
Yeah, that was my question. From the
Yes,
period
yes,
2005
yes,
to
yes.
2010.
No, it was from the budget of Kosovo. It was the obligation of the government of Kosovo.
But money came from Kosovo, in absolute value.
What do you mean?
Well, Zoran Garic is the man from the Serbian Cultural Ministry, Ministry of Culture, and I used to work for him. The money was allocated through the budget, but the budget, the cash flow was poured from the outside, I mean, from abroad.
That's why I said the budget of Kosovo.
But it's not Kosovo's money, is it?
It
the
depends.
Kosovo taxpayers' money?
Yeah. I see that some people in the government say Kosovo taxpayers. That concept of Kosovo taxpayer is a very doubtful one. What is a Kosovo taxpayer? We know that most of the money the Kosovo government has comes from donations and some like customs collections and things like that. So wherever I see, when we were working on the UNESCO bid by Kosovo, I had written a paper, which I have here too, about the situation, a status report for the protection of the Serbian religious and cultural heritage. And they, one of the drafts I had to work on, they said Kosovo taxpayers. This is what the Kosovo government phrase was. And I deleted that. I said, no, that's nonsense. I mean, you cannot speak of Kosovo taxpayers. All we can say, it was paid for through the government of, through the budget of Kosovo, from the Kosovo budget. And the remainder of the works will be done the same way.
Okay, very diplomatic of you. Okay, but are there any estimates as to how much damage has been done in 2004?
Yes, I think, but I don't have like the figures. Maybe Anna, you know.
115, they're saying.
Hmm?
They're saying 115 monuments.
No. How much money?
I don't think it's fair to give any figure because we're talking about religious and cultural heritage, which has a part of financial value, it also has spiritual value. So I don't think that we are the ones to basically give the estimates. It should be the owner, in this case, Serbian Orthodox Church, who should provide estimates.
But it is, let's say, like I said, the RIC, the Reconstruction Implementation Commission, had a list of 34 sites. Okay, not all 150, because those were not, I mean, the 34 that were damaged in March 2004. The Kosovo government has paid something like 6 million so far, or let's say the Kosovo budget has spent something like 6 million so far. The remainder, according to the report I mentioned to you earlier, the works that remain to be done are close to 4 million. But again, I could not agree more with the statement that we're talking about invaluable loss of cultural heritage and cultural values. I mean, if somebody has not visited the last 2 years the Bogorovica Ljeviška church, you should go and see the masterpieces that have come back to the surface. Not all of it has come back to the
It is
surface.
surrounded by the barbed wire. A week ago we have been visited, and It is not even synagogue. You don't see any signs.
Yes, because you have to go through the church. You go to Father Slobodan and ask him to take you there. Okay, but those masterpieces, and then I thought when I saw 2 or 3 years ago how they came back to life, some of them. I mean, the best museums in the world would be proud and happy to have one piece from there. And then the St. George Cathedral, I don't know, did they have such masterpieces there? Now we have nothing, just a white wall, which I still like, but if you think what was there and what has disappeared forever, talking about money is a disgrace.
Thank you. Mr. De Grande, we touched upon the question of the Church of Christ the Savior in the center of Pristina. Mr. Muskopoulos told us that the court dismissed the suit brought on by the University of Pristina. My question to you is the US, I know that many of the internationals are involved in finding the solution for this church. Is the US Embassy involved in this matter, and would you care to try and predict its future? Because we have many things. Some of the Kosovo politicians are saying that they are going to repurpose it, make it into a museum of Albanian suffering in Kosovo. Some say that it should stay as it is because it was Milosevic's monument. And of course there are those who are mainly from the Serbian community who hope that it will become a church one day. So would you care to try to predict where will it go, and is the US Embassy at all involved in finding the solution for this church?
I don't think it's a very wise thing to try to predict the future in general, but one thing I can say is I don't see the Church of Christ the Savior going in any of the directions that you mentioned. I think some of the political polemics that are going on around this particular building, this particular site, this particular church, unfortunately it's become a bit of a flashpoint for trying to get people fired up for some of the more for some flamboyant politicians trying to gain some points. I don't think anything like that's going to happen with Christ the Savior Church without the permission of the Serbian Orthodox Church, which clearly is not going to allow it to become most of those things that you mentioned. The case, from my understanding, has been appealed. So it was thrown out in November, and that's correct. And then since then, the university has come back and appealed the decision. So we can't. The American Embassy, we don't comment on ongoing legal cases. We don't want to give the appearance of involving ourselves in the case that's continuing to go on. I do think, again, it's positive that it's still, that it's in the courts, that the court process is moving forward. It's not stalled, and thankfully it's not taking as long as some of the other cases that we mentioned. And it's moving forward in a way that seems to show progress. Ideally, I personally would love to see a postcard at some point in the future. Somebody that I was speaking with in Pristina had mentioned this to me, that he would love to see a postcard of Pristina that had a mosque, a Serbian Orthodox church, and the Roman Catholic church in the heart of Pristina, showing the multiculturalism, the ethnic diversity, not just of Kosovo, and not just of what Pristina used to be, but really of what Pristina should be. And that's really what I think we can aspire to in the future. Now, whether the Serbian Orthodox Church decides that church is going to be Christ the Savior or some other location is probably going to be largely up to them. But at this point, the structure is there, and it's going through a rule of law process that will hopefully remain peaceful. People can get whatever ideas they want, but ultimately the courts are going to make their decision, and then it's up to the involved parties to come up with a rational solution.
Thank you. Mr. Muskopoulos, can you share more light on this? Can you shed more light on this question?
Well, more light. Anyway, I agree with the assessment that when we are dealing with an ongoing court case, we should refrain from commenting. at the same time, okay, there are some things that I think we should keep in mind. Let me say, sometime in early February, there was a debate organized by an NGO in Pristina on the future of the Serbian church at the university, in the university campus. And I was invited to participate. I could not make it. I sent them my position in writing, and they read it there. And the mayor of Pristina was present, Shpen Ahmeti. And I said that being the only non-Kosovar in the group, I could not pretend to tell people what they should do with the church, but I would give them some parameters that I think are important in dealing with the case. One parameter is that the church has documentation that proves that they were the legal owners of the land on which they started building the church, and they have a building permit. So as far as the church is concerned, and my understanding of the situation, they were perfectly legal to do what they did. Of course, they were legal on the basis of the legislation that was in force at the time, but many other buildings were built at the time, and there is no dispute now as to the legality of any other building from that time. Whether it is Milosevic's church, etc., that is political. I did not go into that at all. But then, when it comes to the church, this is a building belonging to the Serbian Orthodox Church legally, but at the same time, in legal terms, that is, but at the same time, it is a church building. And in Orthodox Christianity, according to the ecclesiastical rules, once a church has been consecrated, then it cannot change its purpose. It cannot turn into another kind of building. And I pointed that to the people there. And this church has been consecrated. Therefore, from the point of view of the church, it cannot turn into something else. Parenthesis. During that discussion, in that NGO organized debate, somebody who's also a member of the Kosovo Council of Cultural Heritage disputed my position. And she said, I can give you examples of Orthodox churches, Christian Orthodox churches that have been turned to mosques. And there are two famous examples, she said, that come to mind right now. One is the Hagia Sophia, and the other is the Bogorodica Ljeviška, which also have been turned to a mosque. That gives goosebumps to think that somebody, a member of the Kosovo Council,